Let's talk about the other news today, Lisa, and that is the deportation flight of a couple of immigrants from this country to South Sudan. Fill us in.
So, Katie, yesterday, the government took a flight of 8 immigrants who had final orders of deportation, meaning an immigration judge had ruled that they were eligible to be deported. Usually those orders list the countries that they are to be deported to. And a federal judge in Massachusetts had previously ruled in April that the administration could not send immigrants with final deportation orders to countries not listed in their orders unless and until 2 things happen. 1, you had to give them notice in a language that they understood. And 2, you had to give them a meaningful opportunity to be heard as to their fear of persecution or torture and the country to which they were being sent. Notwithstanding that, evidence has now been presented to this same judge that his order was violated because these folks were given about 17 hours of notice before being boarded on a plane and taken to South Sudan, where none of these folks are nationals. They are all nationals of East Asian countries, specifically Laos and Vietnam. And there was this order in place that said you couldn't do this without meaningful notice and an opportunity to be heard.
What is the recourse?
The recourse here is hard to determine, right? Because they are now in this other country. However, the judge is telling the Department of Homeland Security, you may not let these people out of your custody. You need to maintain custody of them. And of course, the Department of Homeland Security, at least through its political spokesperson, is saying South Sudan isn't necessarily the final stop for these folks, but she won't disclose where it is that they are supposed to be going. The judge, Brian Murphy, today, according to our colleague Gary Grumbach at NBC, was absolutely apoplectic about this, making clear, in his view, in no uncertain terms, his order was violated and that he needs to get to the heart of who was in contempt of his order and whether or not there are going to be criminal sanctions for that contempt of his order.
Julia, why South Sudan?
Sudan? Well, according to the DHS press secretary today, she said that these are uniquely barbaric individuals and that no other country on earth would take them. And when I asked the ICE director, acting ICE director Todd Lyons, if they had determined that South Sudan was indeed a safe country, because that is usually, that's what they were saying, that in order to not deport someone to their country of origin, you have to find a safe third country. They said, we'll leave that up to the State Department. Of course, South Sudan is a war-torn country. The State Department has a level 4 travel advisory where they do not travel advisory to South Sudan because it is a war-torn country. And this judge today said that most people who got a notice that they were going to South Sudan would likely have to Google it, to look it up, to understand where it was they were being sent, because they wouldn't have the knowledge to know that it is such a violent country to be sent to. I also pressed them today, would they be sent to prison-like conditions? Is there some kind of agreement with South Sudan, like the U.S. made with El Salvador, to put people in that notorious CICOT prison? They said they could not say how they would be kept, but that it wasn't clear that South Sudan was their final destination. I will say another thing that we learned today at this press conference is that they said that these people were still in the custody of DHS. That actually is a problem for their arguments in these other cases about what they're doing with people in El Salvador, because in that case, they argued they couldn't turn those planes around, remember, on March 15th, because they were out of U.S. airspace. Now, in this court case, Katie, they're making the argument that they're still in DHS custody, and so therefore they have not violated a court order by deporting them, because since they're still in DHS custody, they could be brought back. So what does it stand for? Is it whose custody they're in, or is it the actual geography of where these people land? And we don't actually know where they are at this minute. There was a lot of this court hearing that was done behind closed doors to get some of that information. But it's clear that when this plane took off, the destination was South Sudan. That's what the deportation orders that we've seen look like. And at this point, it's unclear what the fate of these people will be. But this judge says they're in violation of the order. And the Justice Department has asked the judge to be more clear about what reasonable time means. The Supreme Court has talked about providing reasonable time. Other judges have said they need reasonable time. It's been defined as 24 hours or 20 days. And I think the Justice Department is arguing, just define what you mean by reasonable time.